Everyone, I'm Gary Tucker and welcome to my studio. This is Advancing with Watercolor. This week I'm going to be talking about a topic that's particularly challenging to watercolor artists, and that is how we preserve the white of the paper. So I'm using Curb's Pond in Central Park in New York City, specifically the sailboats as they move across the water. I want to use this as a way to show you how to use masking compound and masking tape. These are two ways that we can preserve the white of the paper and give ourselves a little bit of an advantage when we're creating the rich colors or brushwork in our painting. So let's get started with our painting of Curb's Pond in Central Park in New York City. I'm using also a brush that does not. Well, we're going to practice a little bit of masking before we get started, and I'm just drawing a few simple lines to give me the idea of some sailboats moving across the water. This is the area that I plan to mask. I'm cutting in some masking tape in the shapes of triangles, and I'm going to mask the sails and the reflections. Then after this I want to put color onto it, but I wanted to show you just through this little drill a way to mask off sections of your watercolor paper. I'm using a masking tape that has a little bit of tack to it. There's a colored tape available, blue masking tape, yellow, that's basically listed as low tack masking tape, and I found that this tape comes off easily from the paper. So in this example I'm using the old standby of beige masking tape that has a stronger adhesion to it, and this will give me a little more confidence when it comes to putting down the color. I'm cutting the shapes with a utility knife. You can see I've put some up on my blackboard there, and I'm just cutting out a few shapes, sticking it to the paper in a very simple manner. And this is probably the most simple way of preserving the white of the paper, is just to cut out some simple shapes, and then you can paint right over them with the knowledge that the white of the paper is still underneath and will be there for you when you decide to let the painting dry and lift it up. So you can see now with a little more clarity how the shapes of the sails are pitched this way and that. The reflections are coming straight down. They're all these very simple shapes, basically triangles made with masking tape. And I'm also going to just put a few areas of masking fluid down. Masking fluid is just that. It's a liquid that is basically kind of like a rubber cement. This liquid that I'm using now has a little bit of color to it, so we'll be able to see it as I place it on the paper. I'm using a brush that is a little bit older and not one of my better brushes. This stuff can easily stick to the hairs of your brush, so I recommend using an older brush and cleaning it as soon as you finish using it. Once we have that down and we've let the fluid dry only minutes, we can start to think about putting color down. And in this example I'm using basically a lateral brush strokes, because I want this example to sort of show how the use of masking tape can give you a little freer movement when you're going to make your brushwork behind the painting or in the atmosphere of the painting. So I'm using a very free form. I'm not trying to paint anything in particular, just showing you some brush strokes as they might appear in my painting. And knowing that I don't have to cut around shapes or stop my brush gives me a little more freedom. And I think that freedom translates into, a more positive expression in our watercolor painting. So this alone is a good reason to think about using some masking tape or some masking compound to take care of some big simple shapes in your painting before you start to mix the color and apply it to the paper. This is sort of a prelude to what I'm going to be doing in the exercise that follows, painting the Curbs boathouse in Central Park. I'll be focusing on the shapes of the boats that float across the water. So the painting is dried, the those brush strokes have a certain integrity to them. They look good. Now we can see what it's going to look like as we lift up the masking tape and notice that the white of the paper has been preserved. We have hard edges throughout, but those shapes that we wanted to catch are thankfully there. So this gives me a good feeling. They're sort of in a raw state right now. What I mean by that is they look rather flat compared to the rest of the painting. This is something that can be adjusted though, and we will adjust it as we get into the as I finish up this little drill. I'm using a kneaded eraser to remove the masking fluid that has dried. The kneaded eraser picks it up very easily and allows me to lift up those fine lines that were rendered with the brush and masking fluid. So this is the finished piece, just a simple little demo on how to use masking tape and masking fluid. And now we're going to progress into a painting of this same subject. Well, I'm using regular masking tape in this case and a pair of scissors to do the masking on my drawing. You can see the boathouse has been drawn and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sailboats approximately on the page. I'm using matte masking tape that was just cut with the scissors. Very simple shapes, triangular shapes that form the sails. This is a larger sail that's a little closer to us, so I'm putting some triangles of this masking tape on top of the sail. I'm also going to put a piece of this tape on the reflection. I do the same for the small sails in the distance. One thing I realize is that for the simple shapes, this sort of procedure is good. If the shape were complex, I would probably use masking compound or some other material. I don't often use masking tape, but I wanted to try it in this case because I plan to paint a very active area behind these shapes. So I don't want to be impeded. I don't want the brushwork to be impeded by the having to stop and start as I come close to a white shape. This is the main reason I'm using masking tape today. So once we have the masking tape in place, everything is pressed down well into the paper, I can start to approach the mixing of color and the application of paint. I'm thinking to approach this basically in 2 steps. The first step is working with these brushes, a flat brush, a sablette brush, and a small mop, and paint the area behind. I'm mixing up a few greens here, a light yellow green, a deeper, richer green, and a green that's primarily turquoise that's going to be on the boathouse itself. I want these colors to mix fluidly on the paper using a sort of light approach. So the work I'm doing now is mostly in a yellowish tree that's behind all of this. And while the paint is wet, I'm going to be carrying this cobalt turquoise or teal color where I plan to paint the boathouse. I'm doing this while it's wet and mixing the color pretty freely. I want primarily soft edges. And then I come to the stand of trees that's to the right of the boathouse. I'm using a deeper green mixed from some sap green, a little bit of burnt sienna, a little bit of cobalt blue. And you can see that all the edges are kind of soft and blurry at this point. I do the same below, and then I let the painting dry. Once it's dried, I come back to the area of reflections, and I start to build up the reflections using a darker mixture of the same colors, sap green, a little bit of the yellow color, and burnt sienna, and a little bit of Payne's gray is mixed with that as well. And I'm trying to create that sense of vertical reflections, colorful reflections, knowing that I'm going to go darker above, but painting the reflections to take advantage of the wet nature and create some a streaky quality or a long quality to these reflections. And to my eye, they're looking okay. And I want to continue this now and start to build in the foliage up above. The paper is dry here, so look at those hard edge brush strokes. I can take advantage of creating some forms, creating some angled light by the way that I use this color and my brush. As I come close to the boathouse itself, I slow down and start to place some more precise marks. I do this because I want the boathouse to stand out as a major part of the motif. And to do that, I need to use this deeper, richer color and start to build up shadows underneath the eaves, shadows coming against the edge of the boathouse, and behind it and to the left of it, I sort of keep this dark application, this dark random application actually. I'm sort of defining trees and shadows from trees, and I do that in a sort of pattern making process, I think is the best way to describe it. So my goal here is to get a feeling of deep shadows behind the boathouse, under the trees, a feeling of light coming in from the right-hand side, and this boathouse, which is clearly defined in the middle of this. Lining up with the reflections, lining up with the color application, etc. Some of the final marks are on the boathouse itself, where I can place some angular marks to define the angle of sunlight, or shadows in this case, coming across the boathouse. And I do a few well-placed touches there to accentuate this. Well, the moment of truth has come. We can lift up the tape now and see how that looks against our painting. The painting is dried. I've used a little bit of a hair dryer to accelerate the process, and it's a little tricky, to be honest with you. I seldom use masking tape or masking compound, so for me it's a little bit of a new or unfamiliar experience. So the tape really is quite stuck on the paper, but it does come off with a little bit of, perseverance. And there you see the first boat kind of coming off the paper here. I lift up that bit of a line that was created with masking fluid that acts as sort of a wake to the boat. And it reads pretty well. In fact, it reads a little too well. It's a little too abrupt. So I know I'm going to have to do some adjusting to this once I get all the tape removed and can see it clearly. These back pieces, they kept all the paint off of the paper. I'm pleased with that. The shapes read as distant boats. I'm happy with that. And the reflections, too, give me the sort of read or perception of what I was looking for. Some simple white shapes kind of gathered towards the back, emulating that feeling of boats on water. So all in all, I'm pretty pleased with the process, and I make some small adjustments to the white, as you can tell, using a bit of the same color that I used in the painting. In essence, this pushes back the sails and they become part of the atmosphere. Now we try horizontal view, same subject. Bring everything sort of down a little.